Let's talk about criminology's blind spot and how Bitcoin, of all things, opened my eyes to it. This blind spot critique is not unique to criminology. It can actually be applied to many other faculties. But as someone who has studied crime for years, I want to talk about how monetary disorder should belong at the center of crime analysis. Now, I have spoken quite extensively about my university experience, online and in person at various Bitcoin meetups, but I like to start with this. I can usually move past the woke framing of education, but when I begin to see it very, very clearly pollute the mechanisms we use to understand and then treat crime, I become very frustrated. Now, I've always felt this sort of instinctual frustration toward the education system, but it wasn't until I actually found out about Bitcoin and saw everything that it pulled the curtains back on that I really was able to understand why I felt this frustration. So back to crime. When criminology attempts to answer the question why crime occurs, it usually begins from a very familiar set of assumptions. Crime is attributed toward poverty, inequality, social exclusion, colonialism, trauma, lack of opportunity, and structural disadvantage. The issue here is that in many university settings, especially in my experience, those that are very, very left-coded, these explanations are treated not only as correct, but as morally superior. They have been presented now as deeper and more humane alternatives to the older theories of classical criminology that focused very, very narrowly on individual responsibility. And to be very, very clear here, I'm not saying that these theories and these structural pressures do not matter and are not criminogenic in nature. They are. What I am saying is that in order to treat the poor outcomes associated with these conditions, we need to look at the root causes for these conditions themselves. Which, by the way, if it isn't already obvious, I believe the root cause is the unsound money that we are dealing with today. And this particular omission in criminology matters far more than I think many criminologists are willing to admit, because money is not some neutral backdrop where which crime simply unfolds. Money is one of the most powerful institutions in any society. It shapes incentives, time horizons, access to stability, one's ability to save for the future, someone's health. It shapes everything. All of these also go on to inform later theories that are spoken widely of in the Bitcoin community, like time preference. Modern criminology seems extremely happy to explain crime through the lens of capitalism, the patriarchy, class relations. You name it, we've all heard it before, but remarkably hesitant to examine the nature of money itself. And this is what creates a serious blind spot where in trying to treat crime, we attribute it toward the wrong cause and thus attempt to treat the wrong problem. Once money can be printed at will, or God forbid, manipulated to the will of the political class, we no longer have a neutral economic playing field. Rather, we have what is a completely distorted incentive environment, which I argue directly informs the crime that we see unfold. Distorted incentives do not stay contained, they travel outward to everyday life, and then they create the conditions that modern criminology seems so intent on focusing narrowly on. Learning about Bitcoin for me, especially during my studies and during this frustration I had with university life, is actually what opened my eyes to this strange middle ground of radical self-responsibility, but also an understanding of money that showed me we are not operating on equal footing. Bitcoin and my research into it showed me that society's problems have not manifested out of thin air, or as Marx would suppose, class struggle. Rather, there is a deeper monetary current that is shaping us. And it's kind of at that point exactly where mainstream university discourse becomes frustratingly shallow. Students are being encouraged to analyze crime through this language of injustice, but not through the mechanics that reproduce instability at scale. And to me, again, it makes literally zero sense. Students are asking and answering these questions about misogyny, racism, social injustice, and made to feel as if they are part of this radical conversation. But it is only radical within the boundaries that leave one of the deepest structural questions unanswered. Surely, in a society where the youngest generation can't even dream of owning a home, then maybe the money is what is producing these criminogenic conditions. And that's not saying that everyone who experiences financial or monetary stress is inherently a criminal, but surely degraded money order can intensify the exact pressures criminology already claims to care about. Gosh, and another really strange feature of fiat society is that some of the most socially destructive behaviors are not illegal at all. Those people who are architecting and directly benefiting from this system that debases our currency and lends itself to crime are revered by people, institutions, and governments around the world. At the same time, people like perhaps you watching this video and myself who choose to operate outside of that extremely polluted financial system face extensive legal barriers. But I guess our coin mixing software and my taste for freedom are a much larger existential threat for humanity. In all seriousness though, finding Bitcoin gave me the understanding and the vocabulary I needed in order to distill my positions into coherent beliefs. And once I was able to label the inconsistencies in my field, being criminology, I feel like perhaps now we will be able to work toward some better solutions. Just like in medicine, if you can't find the root cause and you choose to keep treating the symptoms, the disease itself is not going to magically go away. So when I interrogate the criminology of money, I don't mean that fiat currency has caused every social issue or that Bitcoin is the antidote to all of it. I think that would be really unserious. Instead, what I want to convey is that criminology has failed to think hard enough about the behavioral consequences of unsound money. And it has failed to ask whether some of the disorder it studies is downstream from a monetary system that relies on discretion and political mediation. And here again is where Bitcoin enters the conversation as a serious monetary contrast to the unsound fiat money that we are dealing with today. If criminology and criminologists want to remain intellectually honest, we can't keep talking about simply social injustice at that surface level. We have to look deeper. We have to look at the monetary architecture and we have to look at economics. If Bitcoin offers even a partial restoration of monetary sovereignty, then it deserves to be analysed as something with genuine relevance to crime, disorder, and social stability. I hope I've been able to present my thoughts to you in a coherent manner, and I would like to hear some of yours too.